Hi, everyone. We're continuing our Designing for Music series where we're interviewing some of the most famous album cover designers worldwide. And tonight we have a very special guest, Stephen Averill. And I would like to mention that he was profiled in Judith and Myself book, Rock Art 1992, with other famous music designers. Let me also tell you that myself and Judith are co-hosts, and we are members of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Archival Collection, MoMA, AIGA, and Lou Reed NYPL collections. And we are Grammy and National Design Award nominated. And to my upper part of the screen, Patrick Bambaras, our other co-host, who's our producer, a talented musician, and new HD personality. Stephen Averill, having been involved in counterculture since the 1960s, including DJing in the club called Middle Earth, and formed Ireland's first punk band, the Radiators, from space as singer, writer, as well as graphic designer. Stephen left the group and concentrated on design, and shortly after was approached by a bass player of a band who would become hugely successful. That, of course, was U2. And by the way, U2 was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2005. Other clients included Elvis Costello. He too was inducted in the Rock Hall in 2003. Depeche Mode, the Mavericks, and the Script. I also want to mention in 1993, Rolling Stone in the Reader's Poll voted Achtung Baby Best Album and Best Album Cover. And in 2007, the Rolling Stone voted the best 100 album covers, and one of them was Joshua Tree, and those will be discussed. So let me say hi, Stephen. Glad to have you on.
Thank you.
And we could go right into it. Number one, U2 Boy, 1980, Island Records. Tell us about that.
Well, that was the first of the album covers that I worked with the band. I had worked with them from the very beginning, as you know, and my main objective in that was I produced posters and a couple of single covers and things for them. But I kind of insisted that if I did this work, they would let me design the album cover, which they did. Fair enough that we did that. So. With much discussion, I looked at a lot of contact sheets that the band had presented to me. The cover was taken by a guy called Hugo McGuinness, and I immediately was drawn to this image on the cover and said, guys, this is going to be the cover. This is what it is. But what's unusual about it to a degree is that for a first album, there's no title on the front cover, and there's also the band's name is kind of buried in the hair of the boy. So it's a very unusual cover for that reason. But very successful as an image, and was except for in the States where it was changed by the record company to a different cover because they were worried about any possible pedophilia connections with it, which is something I didn't know about until quite a while after it happened. But later it reverted to the boy cover, as you know it, worldwide.
Let's go into the next cover, which is U2 Joshua Tree, 1987, Island Records. We'll discuss the LP first.
Okay, the LP was, we set out to the States, working with one of my favorite all-time photographers, Anton Corbijn, and we discussed a general kind of feel that we might want for the cover. And at the time, the working title was The Two Americas. They wanted to find America that was the America that we know, the sort of industrialized America, but also the more primitive desert America. So we decided that we would try and find a number of ghost towns that we would use as locations for shooting. And we started off in a town in Sierra Nevada called Bodie, a well-known, it's a national park or monument now. It's kept by, as it was when it was abandoned. So we set out to do that. And on the journey, which was actually my first ever trip to America. And it was quite an interesting journey in many, many ways. But we were driving along and one morning, and Anton was in the back of the bus and suddenly yelled out, "Hey guys, stop the bus, stop the bus." And we didn't know what he was trying to do, but then he said, "Look, there's a tree over there's a Joshua tree in the distance, and it's you very rarely see them on their own." So we stopped the bus, we got out, we headed towards the tree, which is in the distance. We were gone about 200 yards when the bus driver yelled out to us, "Hey guys, be careful of all the rattlesnakes," which kind of made us all stop in our tracks, and then said, "Oh, it's okay, it's too early, it's too cold, you won't have to worry about them." But, we soldiered on, and if you know the cover, on the inside cover you see the band in front of the tree, and one was wearing a kind of loose shirt. It was actually very cold, and I think the band could only tolerate pretending it was the summer for a certain amount of time. But the actual front cover is taken in Zabriskie Point, which was the place where Antonio did his movie, and it's an almost lunar landscape. It's kind of dried earth, and it's kind of really weird place. So that's where the front cover was actually taken.
It's a beautiful horizontal shot too, Stephen. You know, that shot.
Well, I felt that, yeah, I was in a landscape that was cinematic, and I wanted to portray that as much as I could. So that's why we did with the bars, and it was similar to, in fact, the Unforgettable Fire had used a similar feel when we had the bar, the color top and bottom with it. But it was an idea that was copied quite a lot after that. But and what's also slightly unusual about it is that Anton placed the band in the left-hand corner rather than spacing them across the front cover, as you would probably expect to do with a band picture on a cover like that.
So let's go into the singles. 1987, Island Records, the singles. You have a series that you did, right?
Yeah, we knew they had said we were going to release 4 singles from the album. So I wanted to do something that related them together, that they actually kind of made a series. As you see there, one member to each cover. And in fact, the interesting thing is the Bono cover was only really released in New Zealand. It was a single that came out in New Zealand. The other 3 were singles that were released in America and in the UK and in Europe. And the first was Edge, and then I think it was Adam, and then Larry, and then the Bono cover.
Do you have a big budget to create this project?
Well, I mean, it was certainly bigger budget than a lot of Irish acts, because, as you know, I'm based in Dublin. 90% of my clients are Irish bands and musicians, which is something that I wanted to do. The normal route for most designers was to go to London. And I had offers to go to London, but I wanted to stay in Ireland and work with Irish bands. And coincidentally, that's the role that U2 had was very similar. They were a band that were international, but their offices and their base was in Dublin as well. So that worked very, very well for us together as a unit of people. But we didn't. I wasn't aware of a huge budget. I mean, we hired an ordinary coach. We drove up to Reno, and then we drove back through the desert and back to Los Angeles. We didn't stay in any pre-planned hotels. We just stayed in motels or whatever we could find on the route. So it was, and just basically myself, Anton's assistant, stylist, and the band. It was a very tight unit of people.
And so, how did the group decide to choose you as their designer?
Well, it was because, as Spencer said, I had been in a band, a punk band called the Radiators from Space, and Adam Clayton specifically came to see me, to talk to me in the very, very early days of the band about my experience of being in the band, because we were an independent band. We kind of managed ourselves. We did all our own graphics. We sort of did a lot of the work for that, which is probably detrimental to us in the end of the day, because we should have maybe had a stronger manager to kind of continue doing what we were doing. But through that connection, Adam was in the same class in school as my younger brother, and he said, my brother came home one day and said, this guy in school wants to come and talk to you about being in a band. And he came over again and again and again. He came over quite a lot to talk about. We just talked music. We talked about, and we didn't actually talk graphics until the very, very end of that process, when he said, look, we are going to be playing some concerts, and we're thinking of changing the name of the band because they were called The Hype. And his brief to me was, could you possibly come up with a name, something like XTC, that means nothing and means everything? And I went away for 2 weeks and I thought about it, and I thought about the expression U2. I thought that the one letter one and one number is universal. It's kind of can be read and seen anywhere, and people could read whatever they want into it. Now, as you may have read, Bono didn't like the name, still doesn't like the name, but I was quite happy to take it back from him, but they decided to hang on to it. But I think it's like any band's name, like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones. The name becomes the band once the band gets a certain amount of success in what they do. And it worked very effectively. I mean, at the time, there was actually a band in Manchester called V2, and they were kind of slightly worried about that. So I kind of said, just hang on in there. I'm sure you'll survive as U2. And it turned out to be the name that they.
So let's get into Achtung Baby, LP 1991, and tell us about that. There's some great stories with that one, right? I mean, it's such a beautiful. It's almost like a painting to me. The album cover, from the album cover to the inner sleeve with all the photographs.
On the entire package, there was something like 36 different pictures used. It was a joy to us because, as myself and Sean McGrath, who is my design partner in the company, we had kind of complete freedom. Initially, Anton was very against it. He wanted to use one image for the cover because he's a photographer. He likes to sort of have his images used in that way. But the band, especially Bono, wanted to use something a little bit more. I think it was because it was the first time they genuinely gone into color in a big way. They wanted to really show this and show the different moods of the bands. So it became like a jigsaw for us. We just had to really look at these images and trying to balance them out so that you had the same number of solo images, you had the same number of band images on the cover, you had these interesting perspective shots that Anton had taken of the star and the snake and all those kind of things, which was a balancing act to get it all right. But from that point of view, we had so much photography. They did sessions in Morocco, they did sessions in Berlin, they did sessions in Santa Cruz, they did sessions all around the place, in Berlin as well, in the studio. So we were presented with all this material and we tried to make the best use of it. And I think we showed them covers like Exile on Main Street with all the postcards on the wall, and they liked that. Here, but we moved slowly towards the grid, which was almost a very Swiss design style, just having equal squares across the thing, and it gives each one a prominence in itself. But at the same time, you can spend a lot of time looking at that cover.
Spencer and I completely relate to that cover because we actually designed a cover for Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. You know, we did something very similar to the cover where we used an enormous amount of photographs, and we did that. We just wanted to show as much images and visuals as we see in this cover.
When you start seeing that the photographer comes in with a lot of great photographs, right? Stephen, you probably say, wait a minute, let's use all of them, right? And because it's so great, right? And that's what we had with Joan Jett. The photographs, there were so many great ones. So wait a minute, let's just do the thing. It's a home run. So in that way, Achtung Baby really gets out on that. And the other funny story of the LP is, as I wanted to bring up, I talked to you about it, was the photograph that Anton takes of one of the musicians completely nude. And I remember Alan gave me the cover from the UK, and it's uncensored. You know, it's the photograph is on the back cover, right? And then, but then, right, you know what happened. In the United States, I get a call, Spencer, we got to put a fig leaf or something over the you-know-what. And I remember you said, and you went to the band and you put the X on, right? There's a great story on that.
Well, we got a call very late one night, saying that the staff in the place where they packaged the albums refused to work on the album cover with that picture on it.
Wow.
So we said, okay, that in itself is censorship. So we said, let's make it a very clear moment of censorship. So John drew the X, we drew the X, and in those days, the only way we could get it across in a hurry was to fax it across. So we faxed the X across to the UK or to the States for that, and then we sent a sketch of the exact position of where we wanted. So that's why it changed to that X, and we then used T-shirts with the X on it and things like that, just to show that
wow,
it was a censorship moment.
Oh, yeah, and that's interesting. I didn't know you did marketing on that. That's a really great story. Now the inner sleeve, which goes along with the album, is a lot of photographs too, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. And then again, there's a mix of, you can see there's a mix of Morocco, of Berlin, of Santa Cruz, and a real balance of color and ideas. And that was, as you well know, Judith and Spencer, that this is a kind of, we're looking at things more in tonal color than you are. You're not really immediately concerned with the image. You're just trying to get the balance of color, so you get that right.
Yeah.
Once you get that right, then you know that the images are going to work in themselves.
Also, Anton's got this color palette, right, Stephen? That's very
beautiful.
different. It's beautiful
genius.
Color palette he has, right?
Genius.
Yeah, and that's Anton's photography as well, because he was processing his film in a certain way at that point, and there's a certain color tone within the photographs, and that really worked very well as an overall mosaic of images.
Coming up next is the singles, which is beautiful. The single series is gorgeous, and the thing that I found out about was that this is shot from a car, right? Painting on a car, and he photographed different sections of the artwork on the car. Is that right?
We shot that in Dublin, in a studio in Dublin. The car was actually in the studio. Anton was using a light painting process whereby all the lights were switched off, and he then used lights, singular lights across the thing. So the exposure was maybe quite long, a minute and a half or whatever. So he would highlight certain things in the car. So they're all sitting in the car together. It was me. I don't like that as a cover. He kind of would have liked that to be in the album cover. And I kind of said, well, because we'd gone the route of having the multiple image on the cover, let's take this image. And I went to a meeting with the band and I said, let's cut this into 4 parts. So when people buy all 4 singles, again, a slight marketing ploy, you put all 4 singles together and you get a big picture.
I love that. I love that whole concept.
That's
This album,
brilliant.
next album is Elvis Costello, Juliet Letters, 1993.
Elvis Costello was at that point living in Dublin. So we were introduced by my very, very good friend Amelia Steen, who was the photographer of the Juliet Letters. And I did about 6 album covers for Elvis Costello. Funnily enough, we did one called, which was a compilation album. I think it was called Sweet Honey or something of that nature. And he gave me a bunch of photographs from his career and said, can you put these together in a similar way? He was kind of aware of the Acton Baby package, and I put it together. And he came in because he was more proactive than most people. He came in the studio and he sat with me and he looked at what I'd done and said, yeah, okay, but maybe if we move this one over here and this one over here and we'll try that and see how that looks. And we spent about 3 hours going through moving things around till we got exactly back to where we were in the very beginning. Now, with the Juliet Letters, this was an album he did with a string quartet and was quite different from anything he'd done before. And in fact, he's doing concerts this year with the string quartet, the 4 of them, the Brodsky Quartet they were known as. And Amelia and I went out to Ardmore Film Studios, and they were going to film a video of the band playing some of the songs. So we built a film set, and that was the film set that we worked. So between particular takes, we would gather the band around the set and say, let's write this as an image. But I think it's quite successful. Also, in the lettering, I wanted to reflect something of Elvis's Irish background. So if you look at the E in Elvis, you'll see that I actually used a C and put a bar on the C that made it slightly more Celtic looking to give it a bit of distinction.
And you did the next album is When I Was Cruel by Elvis Costello.
Again, this whole process of working, he brought me down to the studio and he sat me in Windmill Lane Studios and played me about 6 to 8 tracks from the album and said, now, see what they inspire in you. And I don't want to have a picture myself. I want an abstract picture. See what you could come up with. So I went away and I went through a lot of. At the time, we had a lot of these. I'm sure you have them as well. These catalogs of abstract art and interesting photography, and they were put out by a company called Photonica. So I went through the books. I marked 6 different images, and I went back the next day to Elvis and I said, I have one image here that I think is perfect for the album. Others that could work okay, but I want to see. I'm not going to tell you which one I think is the one. I said it's marked. There's a sticky note in there, and it just marks the page. But on the back of it, I've marked an X on the one that I think is perfect. He went through them all and said, "This one is the one I want to use." That was the one I had chosen. They're on a fairground. They're kind of like strange little. I don't know what you might call them, but sort of Disney-esque characters on a fairground.
So the next album is Depeche Mode, one of my favorite groups, live in Berlin, Sony Music 2014.
Yeah, that was a time when Anton rang me up and said, "Are you kind of busy at the moment? I've got to do a little clam box release for this live in Berlin." And you can see that's what we have there is 2 of the covers from the box plus a spread from the booklet. But Anton, now I don't know whether he was being truthful or he just hadn't. He took a lot of pictures with his camera phone. He hadn't brought an actual camera to the gig, so he said, "We're going to use these. What can you do with them?" So some of them were relatively low res, but they actually made an interesting texture for the photographs because they had that quality of camera phone photographs. And Anton then had done this lettering. He's very, very into the hand lettering thing, so we just worked hand in hand on the whole thing. I'd done a book with him before, and other album covers. I'd done a book called Strangers, where he and I designed together a book of Depeche Mode photographs. But I just love his work and I like working with him. I think he's a very, very creative person.
Unbelievable. Yeah, he's out of the box. He also worked on Control, the movie Control.
Yes.
With my friend Orion Williams, who produced it. And we had Orion on our show. He's so talented, right? So super creative like you are.
Absolutely. He is a photographer. He has a very dry sense of humor that you really kind of have to get behind, but he makes people relax, and he's also got a slight advantage. He's a very tall man, so he's looking down on his subjects, so that makes them that look a little bit better. But Anton, as you know, also directed that recent documentary about hypnosis, Square in a Circle. Which is a wonderful film as well.
Judith and I were very close with Storm Thorgerson, and that movie was in New York. I think it premiered. Yeah, it did. It premiered in New York, and that will end up with The Radiators, which you were in, photographed by your son. Is that right?
My son took those pictures. That's me, second from the left, with the band, and that was a particular album that I really enjoyed doing. We had decided, I don't know, I'm sure you know the Nuggets box set that Lenny Kaye did on 60s music.
Oh yeah.
Well, this was our version of that. We went out and we found a lot of Irish beat groups from the 60s, and we recorded our new versions of their songs because they weren't available that often, including Thin Lizzy and Van Morrison and people like that. We did that classic Gloria song and those. So the guy in the front, a great friend of mine, and that's Philip Chevron, who passed away a few years ago now, who was also the guitar player in the Pogues.
So this album is called, so everybody knows, Sound City Beat 2012 with Chiswick. And you put out a lot of albums, right? Radiators? Is that right?
We did 2 albums with the original band, but there's a story there, Spencer, about when we were about to. We did a demo for Chiswick Records in the UK, and along with the demo, I designed a cover, and I used a very hand-drawn font for the cover, and it's kind of become well known to people. In fact, Adam wore it on a recent copy on a recent tour. But We sent the demo over with the proposed mocked-up cover, and we got the word back from Chiswick Records to say that they weren't totally convinced by the demo tape we sent, but they loved the cover. So they were going to come over to Ireland and re-record the single, hoping that it would match the cover. So it showed to me that graphics can have power and a use in that kind of situation.
And I want to put the book cover up to show you a suggested book to get. Anton Corbin's book, You Two and I, which I have. It's like my Bible of photography.
No, it's this wonderful book. It goes right through their history from his very first photo sessions to the more recent work. And Anton is still very, very friendly with the band and still working with them. And Anton and I are still very, very friendly as well. But as I say, I left the design company a few years back. I've been working more or less 45 years nonstop on graphic design for the music industry. And I just wanted to take a small break and step back. And I actually started to work a lot more with up and coming independent bands in Ireland and there. So I find that very satisfying because these guys don't have a huge budget, and I'm kind of don't necessarily need the big budgets that I used to have. I'd love to have them occasionally and do something like that, but I can sit back and do something for somebody that they can afford to pay for, and that is a great joy.
Well, it's good to hear you're having an enjoyable life. We love your work, and we're so glad to have you on. And you're just one of those people in Judith and our lives, I'm sure, Patrick, that we look up to as a great designer.
We're really honored. And
we've all had the pleasure of getting our work into so many sitting rooms. And when I was doing a lot of the YouTube work, it's amazing how many people come up to you and say that particular cover is a part of my life. And and that is wonderful. I mean, it's better than having a single painting in a gallery. You can have these thousands of these, millions of these around the world.